Hey there, young historians. We've been working our way through the Reconstruction era and seeing how each phase of Reconstruction affects the citizenship of African Americans. Our essential question was, to what extent did Reconstruction bring African Americans closer to full citizenship? Well, unfortunately, when Reconstruction ends, we actually see a reversal in those rights. That's right. All of those gains that were being made forward are now being unraveled and go backwards. This is Reconstruction Reversed, and here is an overview. White Southerners, specifically Southern Democrats, used many tactics to keep African Americans from enjoying equal rights, and it returned many of them to a situation that was similar to slavery but by a different name. African Americans moved backwards in education rights and voting rights and equality and equal protection of the law. See, after the war, many white Southern leaders wanted to create what they called a New South. These Southern leaders began to talk of this New South of rising from the ashes of the war and creating new mills and factories and cities that would be equal to those in the North. This painting here shows a New South rising from the ashes of the Civil War. And although Southern leaders hoped this would be the future of the South, most whites and blacks continued to live in a system of poverty. Check out these photographs right here of the New South. It sure looks like white and black Southerners are remaining trapped in this old South of poverty. And those photos right there are not from the Civil War. They are not even from the Reconstruction era. Those are from the 1930s. This is a good 50 or 60 years after Reconstruction, and we're still seeing a same system of poverty. Let's talk about education rights and losing ground in education. The photo above me here is from 1895. It's a school for white students, and over here we see a photo from 1901 of black students outside of their school. And what those Southern leaders began to do is, when they had their budget and they had a certain amount of money that they could spend, instead of spending money on education, they said that money is going to have to be spent elsewhere. And as this governor from Virginia says, Frederick Holiday, "Free schools are not a necessity, they are a luxury, to be paid for like any other luxury by the people who wish their benefits." In other words, if you wanted to get an education, you needed to pay for it. And as you may know, education can sometimes be the path out of poverty. Being learned, or learning information, can help you to advance in life. And if it costs money to get an education, that keeps people in poverty. We also see African Americans begin to lose voting rights. And even though the 15th Amendment is still there, and the 15th Amendment still says that the right to vote cannot be denied based on race or color or previous servitude, the Southern states found some loopholes. They found some ways to deny those voting rights. One of those is a poll tax. Now, when you go to vote, you'd say you're going to the polls. It's a place that you vote. A tax is an amount of money that Southerners had to pay in order to vote. This means that voting became a luxury. If I had to decide between housing, food, and clothing, or voting, I think I'd probably take my money and use it to take care of those necessities of food, clothing, and a place to live. And this means that the people who got to vote were the wealthy people. Now, it wasn't that much money in the context of today, $1, $1.50, but today that would be worth around $60. And so if you had to decide between spending $60 to vote or just keeping those $60 for something else, usually people would do that. And so this kept people from voting. And they also created something called a literacy test. To be literate means to be able to learn to read and write. And so literacy test was a test designed to show if somebody knew how to read and write. Now, last time I checked at the Constitution, there's only a few rules to be able to vote. You need to be a citizen, and currently you need to be 18 years old, and that's it. There's no requirement to be able to read and write, but those Southern states passed laws that said you must know how to read and write. And so these tests that required Southerners to show that they could read before allowing them to vote were designed so that any African American would fail. In fact, they were really designed so that anybody would fail. See, the person that would be judging whether somebody got the question right or wrong could often make a decision that might not be the same for everybody. Some of the questions were quite vague. Here's how the literacy questions or literacy tests looked. It says, do what you are told in each statement, nothing more, nothing less. Be careful as one wrong answer denotes failure of the test. You have 10 minutes to complete the test. And there's 30 questions. And some of the questions were like this. Write every other word in this first line and then print every third word in the same line, original type smaller, and first line ended at comma, but capitalize the fifth word that you write. It might take a while just to figure out what that question is even asking you, let alone reading it. And these are the kinds of questions that people were expected to answer. How about this one? Print the word vote upside down, but in the correct order. So these types of questions were designed to be unclear, that somebody would really struggle through them. And now you might be saying, well, okay, how is this really something that is going to keep African Americans from voting? You might be thinking, I mean, if somebody has to pay a poll tax, everybody has to pay it. Or if everyone has to pass a literacy test, everyone has to pass it. Well, they passed a law that included something called a grandfather clause. And it said that the taxes and the tests did not apply to any man whose father or grandfather could vote on January 1st in 1867. In this way, the literacy tests and the poll taxes weren't really about the color of someone's skin. No, I mean, everybody has to take it unless your father or grandfather could vote in 1867. Now, here's the thing. There was not a single African American man who voted during that time because they didn't even gain the right to vote until 1870. That means any white man could vote without paying the tax or passing the test, and any black man needed to pass the test and pay the tax. See, the grandfather clause was a racist and tricky maneuver. There was also a series of laws passed called the Jim Crow laws, and Jim Crow laws enforced segregation. Segregation is when blacks and whites have to be separate in public places. And these were passed all over the South, and you can see a couple of examples here. This one right here shows a segregated water fountain. Over here is a segregated waiting room, and way over there is a segregated train car. You can see that there's a car for white folks and a Jim Crow car. And you can also tell in this one here and this one over here that both of those are quite a difference in the quality or the value of the items that were offered to the two groups. Well, an editorial in a newspaper printed this to show how unjust and unfair and ridiculous the laws were. If there must be Jim Crow cars on railroads, there should be Jim Crow cars on street railways, also on passenger boats, and there should be Jim Crow waiting saloons or waiting rooms at all stations and Jim Crow eating houses, restaurants. And there should be Jim Crow sections at the jury box and a separate Jim Crow witness stand in every court and a Jim Crow Bible for different witnesses to kiss. Now, this was an editorial in the newspaper and it was meant to be a joke, but many of these actions did actually take place. See, they were mocking it, and it turns out that that is exactly what Jim Crow laws ended up doing. Now, many African Americans argued these segregation laws are a violation of our 14th Amendment. Remember, we had 3 constitutional amendments during Reconstruction. The 13th said slavery is abolished, the 14th said equal protection of the law, and the 15th said that African American men could vote. And they argued this is violating the citizenship and equal protection of the law clause in the 14th Amendment. Well, there's a man named Homer Plessy, and he decided to take this protest all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. See, Homer Plessy was on a train car, and he got into one of those train cars for white folks. And once he went on to that train car, he was arrested. And they said that he cannot go in that car because he's black. Well, Homer Plessy was about 1/8 black. He had some black ancestry in his family. And he challenged this and said, I should be able to go in any car that I want because of the 14th Amendment. Well, the U.S. Supreme Court listened to this case, and they decided that segregation does not violate the 14th Amendment, as long as the facilities available to both races are roughly equal. What they were saying is Jim Crow laws are fine. It's okay to have segregation. It is legal, as long as those situations are roughly equal. Now, the way I look at those don't look roughly equal to me. The Supreme Court sometimes makes some really bad mistakes and some bad decisions, and this is one of them. Plessy versus Ferguson is one of those racist decisions that has been made by the Supreme Court, and here you go. So we saw a lot of progress that was made towards full citizenship, and much of that progress, or some of that progress stayed in place, but much of that progress was then reversed. Hey, thanks for traveling with me on this journey through the Reconstruction era from 1865 to 1877. Remember that our essential question was, to what extent did Reconstruction bring African Americans closer to full citizenship? I hope that you were able to come up with an answer for that question for yourself. See you next time. Peace.